Hi, welcome to the Hematology, Oncology, and the Immunological System and Disorders of the Victoria's online course. We're going to start by talking about the basics in hematology. By knowing and understanding the basic in hematology, it helps us to be able to break down the pathologies and diagnoses of the disease process. Hematology is predominantly interpretation of the labs. So let's start with blood. Blood is made up of plasma. And when you think about plasma, you think about everything, the red blood cells, your white blood cells, your clotting factors, such as your fibrinogen. But when you take out the fibrinogen from the clotting factors, if you remove the clotting factors from your plasma, what you'll get is what we call serum, which is predominantly made up of proteins, electrolytes, glucose, and hormones. So now when we go into the origin of all blood products, which is the bone marrow. Every blood product originates from the bone marrow, and they are at that point undifferentiated. So the main ones we're going to be talking about is the myeloid and the lymphoid stem cells. These stem cells descend directly from the bone marrow and we'll break them down individually, and we will be able to see where all of our blood products originate. So we have from the myeloid, you're going to get most like your red blood cells and your white blood cells. They're going to emerge from this. And then when you think about your lymphoid cells, this is where you're going to get all the lymphocytes, like the B lymphocytes, your humoral immunity, your cellular mediated immunity. So let's talk about the myeloid for a minute. So in your myeloid stem cell, you're going to get the erythroblast, which now will become the reticulocytes and then become the erythrocytes that we call the red blood cells. Then you also get the myeloblast that's going to become your myelocytes, and these are going to form your granulocytes, which is your neutrophil, basophils, and your eosinophils. Then you get the monoblast that's going to become your monocytes, and the megakaryoblast will become your megakaryocytes, and this will eventually become your platelets. From that lymphoid cells, you're going to get your B cells and your T cells. Then let's go into these cells individually. You will know your red blood cells, its function is to carry hemoglobin and transport oxygen all for the tissues of the body to use. The lifespan for your red blood cells is usually 3 months, and at that point they will become destroyed and they'll be filtered out of circulations. Your platelets, their function is just to aggregate together and help with the coagulation by forming plugs to control bleeding. The platelet lives about maybe 10 days, while your WBC, which is your white blood cells, and under that you get the myeloblast, and you also get your monoblast. Your monocytes and your monocytes. So what they do is they fight infection, And when you think about the granulocytes, which are your neutrophils, and the basophils and the eosinophils. So your neutrophils will fight bacteria, they fight fungus. You see them elevated in situations like that. Then you have the eosinophils, will they become elevated because they fight parasites, and you can also see them in allergic response. And when you see the basophil, you'll see them, they produce histamine. So you can also see that in allergic response. Then your when we now go into the plate, we already talked about the platelets. So we go into the lymphoid cells, which are your B cells and your T cells. Your B cells, lymphocytes, is what we call the immortal cell. They usually mature in the bone marrow. So one way of remembering is B for bone marrow, B cells. So they become the plasma cells and the memory B cells. Your T cells will become your CD4, CD8, and your cytotoxic killer T cells. They mature in your thymus gland. And another good ways of remembering that is the T cells will mature in your thymus gland. Then we go into the terms, your basic terms to know, which will be your red blood cells indices. It is very important that you remember the normal values, and the good ways of remembering normal values is just trying to my ways of doing this is I look at, like, for hemoglobin. Let's talk about the red blood cells for a minute. I just take red blood cells. I look at it for male is around 4.5 to 6. For female, we're going to talk about 4 to 5. So when I break them in the middle, I think about male is about 5. So female, you just remove like 0.5 out of that 5. So about 4.5. So that gives me the middle range of remembering my normals for red blood cells. Then when it talks about, when I think about hemoglobin, I just think about the puberty age, which for female is around 13 averagely, and for male is around 15 averagely, give or take -2 or +2. So that kind of gives me that my range, to remember hemoglobin. And for hematocrit, I'll just multiply hemoglobin by 3. That will give you your hematocrit. Then when we start talking about cells, we have the MCV, which is, the meaning is just to is telling you the size of your cell. MCV, normal range for red blood cells, is 80 to 100. So the size of my normal red blood cells is 80 to 100. So I think about it like B for blood. So to get a B in class, I need 80 out of 100. So that kind of gives me that, jogs my memory to remember my normal. So anything below 80, you were thinking about a small cell, which we define as microcytic. Then anything above 100 is a large cell, and we'll call that the macrocytic. Then when you think about the MCH and the MCHC, that's just giving you the average weight of an hemoglobin in a red blood cell. So while MCH will give you the average weight of an hemoglobin, of one hemoglobin, MCHC will give you the average weight of hemoglobin. Okay, I'm going to repeat that. So while MCH will give you the average weight of hemoglobin of one red blood cell, the MCHC will give you the average weight of hemoglobin of red per the volume of that red blood cell. So MCH, average weight of hemoglobin for one red blood cell. MCHC is the average weight of hemoglobin per the volume of that red blood cell. They are very similar. They're about 30 to 33. So I just remember it by saying the average weight of an hemoglobin, either per red blood cell or per the volume of a red blood cell, is 1/3 of the total. So about 30, 33, so give or take. Then when we think about the total ion binding capacity, this is very similar to your, it's related to your transferrin. So the total ion binding capacity is just telling you the space on the transferrin that the ion that is available for ion to bind into. So your transferrin is your transport that carries ion, while your total ion capacity is the space available on that transferrin for the ion to bind into. So you can think of it like your transport, which is like your car, while the TIBC is that seat that is available for the ion to sit. Or, that's yeah. So when you think about it, when you have space in the car, their seats are empty, that means that you have open space in the transport. So you will see how we're going to be using it as we progress. One thing that you also have to understand is when they say ferritin is just the storage in the serum for iron. So transferrin, transport, if I use transferrin to remember, so I don't confuse ferritin with my transferrin. So my ferritin is my storage, while my transferrin is my transport. While my ion capacity, total ion binding capacity, is my space for the ion to sit in. When your storage is empty, then you're going to have open space for ion. When your storage is full, you're going to have like lower space for ion to. So transferrin and ferritin, they work in inverse proportion. So if one is high, the other one is going to be low. So we'll see that as we progress. So when we now think about the RDW, the RDW will measure the variability in your red blood cells. So this is significant, especially in iron deficiency, when the red blood cell sizes become smaller. The reticulocytes are your little cells that are going to become your red blood cells. So you can look at them like baby red blood cells. They are produced in the bone marrow in response to low red blood cells. Normal should be usually around 2, but let's say less than 3% is considered normal. When you start seeing it more than that, then something is going on that is making the red bone marrow to start producing more cells to some. So um so we're going to see that too as we progress. The reticulocytes, I kind of remember it this way. I think about the average babies in the average American family is like 3 or less. So that's a way of making me that I use to remember that, oh, okay, the reticulocytes, maybe it's abnormal, it's becoming high or it's low. And one thing I also want to read, it takes about 24 to 48 hours for reticulocyte to mature, and this maturity all happens in the spleen. When I'll go back, when your MCHC is low, you get that pallor, like um hypochromic cell. The red blood cells become more pale. So we'll continue to talk about that as we go.